Hey, this is Chris, and welcome to Coding in Public. We've been building out this to-do list application this week, and last time I went over the HTML and CSS, and this is what we've got so far. We've got this plus button that will hover, and you can add new tasks here, and then below they'll show up, and you can exit out of them here below. You can see that showing up here. Okay, so today we're going to work on the JavaScript. You can see we've got this main.js file linked up here, and it is officially working. We're going to remove some of the HTML we added last time because we're going to use JavaScript to add this. And now when I do that, you'll see the task 1 is gone. So we need to start working so that we can add some more tasks below. So let's kind of map out with some pseudocode here where we're going, what we're going to be doing. First of all, we're going to have query selectors. These are going to be things we're going to use throughout the application. So we'll go ahead and grab these up top here. Then we're going to have some event listeners. Next, we're going to have items to save or check or save local storage. This is where we're going to save or keep the items so that even if we close down our tab or we refresh, those images or those tasks will stay there for us. Then we're going to add some functions for saving and deleting tasks. And generally speaking, these are kind of going to be the things we're going to do, and we'll jump around this as we go. Well, we know we're going to need a few things here, so let's go ahead and come up here to the query selectors here. And we're going to grab some constants. And the first thing we're going to do is grab the task form itself. So we'll come in here and we're going to say query selector, and we need the actual form tag. So we've got the form. Next, we need to grab the task input. This is where you're going to be adding tasks, and we've got an input ID there of ToDo input. So we'll grab that. Finally, we're going to grab the actual task list. Let's grab that, and that's the UL. And the UL just has a, let's see, we're selecting this in JavaScript, so let's just make sure this is an ID. It makes more sense to me, and then we'll come back over here and make sure that's an ID in our Sass as well. And again, this was called task list. Okay, so we've got some basic query selectors that we're going to need here. Let's go ahead and I'm going to copy this template text over just so you can see what we're going to be doing. Last video we added this HTML template tag. This essentially won't render on the page, but you can use it, for instance, in JavaScript here to go ahead and select it and duplicate it and then do what you want with it. So we're going to come over here and get a little bit more room. The first thing we want to listen for is the submit button over this direction. So we've got our task form itself here. We're going to add an event listener, and we're listening for a submit on that form. And that will both take anytime we click on this button or anytime we hit enter on our keyboard because we've set it up with a form. Now, the first thing we need to do is if we come in here and we start typing, and as we add something and we hit enter, it's going to actually refresh the page. We don't want that to happen, all right? So we need to actually prevent the default. So we can just take the E, which is the event, the submit here, and if you want to, we can add this as, call it an event to make that a little clearer, and we can just say prevent default. Oh, it's yelling at us here because we added this template tag that's not valid JavaScript. We'll come back to that. So now if we come over here and say something and we hit enter, it will not refresh. It also won't do anything because we haven't hooked that up yet. But at least we're not refreshing the page on ourselves here. Okay, next let's go ahead and console log the task input. All right, so when we come over here and we hit something and hit enter, it'll give us the entire tag there, that input tag. What we're interested in is the actual value that is going to be part of this input field. So let's come in here and say dot value. And now if we type something and hit something and enter, it will simply say something. It'll give us the actual thing we typed in. And that's what we want to know about. So we're going to come in here and we want to know basically if there is anything in this input value field. So if somebody hits enter ahead of time or clicks this plus button, we don't want it to submit or do anything because they don't have a task. Otherwise, we'll be adding blank tasks to our project. So we'll say if, and then we'll say task.input.value is equal to nothing. I guess we could also do, or if task input.value is equal to null, either of those, then we simply want to return. And we can just put it like that. In fact, It's not even on a new line. We don't need to put on a new line if we're just going to have return there. So if that's happening, then return just jump out of this event listener altogether, stop whatever you were doing. If not, in other words, if there's something in there, then we want to actually send it to a function we're going to write. And we'll just call this function create new task. What do we want to send it? This task input dot value. So we're grabbing the task input, and whatever we put in that input field, we're going to send it to this new function that we're going to write. Okay, so let's come down here and let's go ahead and write the new function. So create new task, I think is what we called it, and it will take a input. So we'll call this, I guess, task, something like that. Let's just create this as an arrow function. All right, now here's what we want to do. We want to actually grab the task template and then replace it. So here's this task template. This is what we're going to grab, and we're going to use this and then just basically replace this inner text here with the task that we've received. Now, if we don't do it this way, we have to actually manually create each of these tags. So we'd have to say something like document.createElement, and then we'd have to say, give me a list element, and then add this class to it, and then give me a p tag, and then add this, so it just takes a lot more time, and this is one of the ways that you can speed it up. So we're going to say task template here is equal to query selector, document.query selector, and it is just going to be task template. So grab this task template, and then let's go ahead and clone that template. So we'll just call this, we'll call it cloned list. We'll say document dot, and then here's the magic. We want to say import node, and that'll actually take everything that's here, and it'll copy it and make a copy of it for us. And what do we want to do? We want to say that task template dot content. Grab all of its content. Now, if you just leave it at this, it'll only copy the high level, just the template tag itself. So you can pass it another variable, which is true or false. True means it's a deep clone. It will grab everything in it. False means it's a shallow clone, which is the default anyhow. So if we leave it at this, we've now got everything here inside this template tag. This is what we've just grabbed and cloned. So we want to add our input inside this p tag here. So we'll come in here and say task text is equal to cloned list dot query selector task text. And inside that task text, we want to set the inner text of it to whatever our task was. And then finally, now that we have the task, we have yet to actually dump it into the page. So let's come down here and say task list dot append child. We want to append the entire cloned list. All right, this task list here again is that UL. So that means when we come in here and we say something and hit enter, it should jump down. Okay, let's see, create new task, task tag, tax, oh, text. That's what happens when you type and text at the same time. All right, so something, enter, and there you go. It pops in down below, perfect. And it's even got this button, everything's laid out just as we'd expect. We can come in here and say something 1, something 2, something 3, and you see it just spaces them out there all evenly. That's perfect, that's what we want. All right, one thing I noticed when you come in here and you click, you see there's this little outline that shows. We've got this hover state, we don't need that outline here, so let's come over here and let's see, we added both of them. Here, let's say on the focus, outline of none. Now we come in here, there we go, it doesn't show. Okay. Now if we refresh the page, everything is going to disappear because we haven't saved anything to local storage, but already it's functioning, and that's most of the way there. We want to be able to now exit and delete this, add another one very quickly here is easy enough already. But let's come over here and we actually want to know how to delete things as well. So now that we've kind of used this template tag for reference, let's get rid of that. What we want to do is when we click on this delete button, we want it to get rid of whatever this item is, the list item itself. Now here's the tricky thing. If we try to add an event listener, this doesn't yet exist on this page. So let's go ahead and see what that was called. Task delete, I think, was the ID of that button. So if we come in here and say, let's see, const delete equals document.querySelector, and we add that tag, and then we say delete.addEventListener. Click, and we have something console.log deleted. If we try this, the problem is there's nothing yet on the page, and so we're going to get yelled at. We're also first going to get yelled at here because I need to name this something else. All right, there we go. But now you see here, this add event listener is not going to work because there is nothing like that on the page. Now, if we come in here and hit something, it's just the whole thing is not working now because of this. So we can't add an event listener on the actual task delete. But one thing that is already on the page is this task list. That's the UL. And we can use that UL to say, hey, if you click on anything in the UL, let's check to see what you've clicked on and kind of go from there. So that's what we're going to do. So let's grab that task list itself. So we're going to say task list.add event listener. Click. We are going to grab the event that you've clicked on, and then we'll just say console log, and then we'll just say what we want to do is grab the e.target. This tells us the exact thing we clicked on. Now right now the UL isn't exactly visible, but now that it is, we can come in here and start clicking. You can see we clicked there. Now it's telling us we clicked on that delete button. So anything we click on here, it's giving us the LI, the button, the actual text in there. So we can use this to our advantage because the UL is already on the page. So let's just say if that e.target.id, because that's the thing we want to know. If we've clicked on something that has an ID that equals that task delete. So if you've clicked on anything that has the ID that equals task delete, then what we want you to do is actually delete the task. So let's actually write another function that we're going to call from this. So we'll say delete task will be our function, and we're going to pass it the e.target. Now, if we pass it that, if we've clicked on the delete, it'll delete, but what is it going to delete? The target, which is the actual button we would have clicked on. So that's not quite right. So I guess before we do too much, let's console log and figure out what it is that we want to send to our function. So we'll do e.target, and we know it's the ID. It would just give us the ID. So we can actually search up the DOM tree, similar to a query selector that searches down. We can search up it by saying closest, and then we write this almost like a query selector. We want to delete the closest task. That's the LI. You might notice here, this is the thing that has the class of task. So we want to, when we click the button, we want to delete the entire LI that it sits in. So let's make sure we've got that correct here. We're going to have to add another task. Click around this way, click this, and that's exactly what we're getting, the entire task. That's what we want to get rid of. Okay, so let's pass that entire thing here to our function that we're going to write called delete task. All right, now we need to write this function down here. So let's come down below, and we've already created a new task. Let's now delete the tasks. So we'll say const delete task. And again, we're just going to write this as an arrow function. It's going to take in a task, which is what we've just passed it here. And it's pretty simple to delete it. We're just going to say task.remove. All right, so now if we come in here, we say something, and then we click this, it just gets rid of whatever that was. And we can add multiple somethings, and each of the ones we exit out of, it's kind of hard to tell since they're all named something, but it deletes the right one. So we've now got it to where we can add tasks. We've now got it to where we can remove tasks. But if we add a task and refresh our page, everything is gone. So the last thing we need to do is actually set the local storage. Now the local storage you can find here under application. It might depend on your browser. Some of them label this a little bit differently. But here you see here I've got this current tasks key value pair already set up from setting it up beforehand, but we'll remove that here. What we're going to do is add a key and a value pair that work together well here, and we can save things to it. And this will save in the person's local storage. It's not going to send anything to your site or anything like that, so it's really safe, and you can actually store a bunch of stuff in here. So the first thing we want to do is check to see if anything is in this local storage. Now we're going to give it a key name. We can name that whatever we want, but we'll call it something like current tasks.list or something like that. And by naming it something unique, you ensure you're not running over stuff that you might add on your site later. So let's go ahead and check to see if something like that exists. So let's write a function, and we'll just call it check local storage. And we'll just do an arrow function since that's what we've been working on today. And we want it to return for us what is in that local storage. So we'll say return local storage. This is how you reference things in the local storage, .get item. And we're going to call that current task list. How about that? And we just want it to return whatever is there. To make this easier to see, let's go ahead and say console log first so we can see what's actually showing up. So if we come in here and we actually run that check local storage, and we console log it, let's jump over this way. It tells us null. There's nothing there. Okay, so we know that, but what we want to know essentially is whether or not there is something there. So that's good enough by us. Let's come back here and change this to a return because we're going to use this little function every time we load the page and anytime we need to kind of look at our lists again. So we're going to use this function as kind of like a little mini if statement for us. So we'll come in here and we'll say if that equals to null, or, and then let's just copy this all over again here, or if it's equal to nothing, we want to return that, and we'll call that from our actual event listener here. So what we're going to do next is write an event listener on the window that uses this function to check to see if we have anything in the local storage. Let's come back up here, and the very first event listener we're going to have is the one on the window. So we'll just say window.add event listener, and what we want to listen for is the DOM content loaded. And just like a click or a key down event here, it will only run this once the event has happened. DOM content loaded means basically once the web page is loaded. So right now we'll just say console.log, it's loaded. Come back here, when we refresh the page here, you see it's loaded shows up. Now we want to actually use an if statement here to run to check to see if this returns true or false. So let's first of all just run it and just say, let's console.log the check local storage result. Okay, so we hit refresh and it says true. Now let's go ahead and manually just add something here, and what we called this key current task dot list, and then we'll just say like hi. Okay. Now when we come back to the console here and we reload, it's going to give us false because it doesn't equal to either null or to nothing. All right, so let's remove that, get rid of this here. And we can use that here to our advantage. So let's say if that check local storage does not equal true, that means we've got tasks already, and we want to use whatever tasks are in there and parse them back and use them to populate our page. So in order to reference it here, and we're going to use it down here, if we want to reference those items here, we need to create some kind of variable outside. And so we'll just call it a let variable, and we'll call it current tasks. And right now we're just going to, by default, we'll set it to an empty array. So that if we've got something already in our local storage, we can just say current tasks equals, and then we're going to use JSON, which is how it'll be returned to us. Parse, we want to parse that local storage dot get item, and we called that, what do we call it? Current task dot list. So we're going to parse that back to us. And then we're going to say, let's take those current tasks, and then for each of them, we're going to take the task, and we're going to create a new task and pass that task in. So all we're going to do is writing it this way means that we can reuse this exact same create new task that we do when we click plus. It's going to do the exact same thing. It's going to grab the task template, clone it, add the text, append it, all that kind of stuff just from reloading the page. And that's why we wrote this create new task the way we did. When we reload then, if there's anything here, it'll run each of those through and add them as a separate list item here below. Now, perhaps the first thing we should have done is gone ahead and saved some so that we could actually see how this works, but we've kind of done it in reverse here. So let's go ahead now and come back here, and we've checked local storage. Let's now save to local storage. So we'll say const, let's say save to local storage, and we'll This will take in a task that we're going to pass it. And what we want to do is use that same check function up here to basically figure out if something's already in local storage or not. So we'll say if check local storage, that's our function we wrote just up above. If it's not equal to true, in other words, if there is something in the list, then we want you to go ahead and say, let's grab those current tasks, and we're going to use the same kind of thing we did here up above. We want you to actually parse each of those tasks for us. What this parse does is it turns it into an array, and then we can say current tasks, that's the array.push. We want to push the task that we just got, which adds it to the array. Now, by doing this check here first, remember we already have it by default set to this array, this empty array. So if there isn't anything there, it's just going to take that empty array and push our task onto it. However, if there is something there, it'll first grab that, convert it back down to an array, and then we'll push our task to it. So the last thing we need to do now is set that local storage, save that local storage. So we'll say local storage. This time we're going to do .set item. Or we'll do current task.list. We want to set it to JSON.stringify, which takes the array, this current tasks, and it's going to push it back to JSON. We're just going to pass it that entire array. So now as we come in here, you'll notice that this key value pair is going to populate. So if I hit something and hit enter, oh, and you know what? We forgot to actually call that when we save something. So what we need to do is go back up to our event listener here. And in addition to creating a new task, we're going to actually save, what do we call that? Save to local storage. And we're going to pass in the exact same thing. So task input.value. Now when we come in here and type something, let's see, it should be saving that to our local storage. So we've passed in the value of that task input here. We've grabbed it down here. The task is what's come in. We've pushed it to it. Let's see if we've got any errors in our console here. We do. Current task is not defined. I have a singular task somewhere, and it should be multiple tasks. So let's see. Current task. Aha. Right here. Okay, let's try that again. And let's come back and open up our application area, something, and there we go. It shows up. Now, if I do something 1, and something 2, you see how it's running that check each time, and this save local storage is saying, hey, look, there's already something here. Let's go ahead and parse that down to the array, and then push the new thing onto it at the end, and then we'll set it back again as the local storage item. Now, there's one other thing we should probably do in our event listener up here and submit. We want to take the input value here, and every time you hit enter, remove whatever was there, because you don't want to have to constantly hit backspace to get rid of that. So we can just say task input value is now going to be equal to, we could do an empty string, or we could just do null. And so if we come in here and now every time we submit something, it removes it here again, so we don't have to worry about that. Now we delete all these things, but if we refresh the page, our window event listener, everything we set up earlier that we never got to see, is actually working now. It's going to grab all those, parse them into an array, and then add each of these down as a list item. So we need to figure out a way to remove these, and that's kind of the last step we need to worry about. So let's go back down to our remove or delete task. So not only do we want to remove it locally here, in other words, just like off the web page, we want to actually remove it from the local storage. Okay, so let's just console.log the task. Now here's what we want to know. We want to know what the actual text is of the task. Because remember, we've passed it, let's see, where was our delete task? Okay, right here. So we've passed it the actual li. So now we need to go back down the DOM tree. So we'll say we're going to grab that task that's been passed in. We want to run a query selector on that. And what we want to grab is the actual p tag. What do we call that p tag anyhow? Well, let's inspect it here. We called it task text. That was our class. So let's console log that, come back to our console here. We click on this. Okay, so we're actually getting that something. Now let's grab that text, and then we're going to grab the inner text from it, and let's do the same thing. Click on here, click here, something, something. Okay, so it's giving us the actual text. Now what we can do is use this to our advantage and we can figure out which item it is in the array we've got over this way. So we want to figure out, when we click on something, we want to figure out which item it is so that we can properly delete it. This time we want to grab this text here, and we want to say, let's grab our list, our local list here. That list was called current tasks. We want to say index of that current tasks that matches this. Let's see if this works here. We come over here to console log, we click here. That's the number 1 position. This should be the 0. This should be now the 3 position. All right, so this is telling us, again, not what position it is and what's left, but what's actually the position is down here. And we can use that to do something called splice. So let's first of all just say, let's call this something like const task to be deleted is whatever that is, that current tasks.index of. So now we know the index that needs to be deleted. Now what we can do is we can say current tasks.splice task to be deleted. And what this does is says, hey, this is the number you need to get rid of. And a splice is one of those things with an array that will actually alter the array. It doesn't just duplicate it or anything like that. It'll actually alter the original array. And we want to say only do it for 1 position. So only take that singular thing out. Now, what we've done is if we come down here in console.log current tasks, and then let's copy it up above here as well. Come over this way. When we click here, you'll see before we clicked, we had 6 items. After we clicked, we got rid of whatever one we clicked on. I don't remember. Let's do this DJI. All right, here we go. Same thing. First it's here, now it's gone. The problem is we didn't do anything to this actual local storage. But since we've got our local variable updated here, let's push it now to our local storage. So let's get rid of this. Let's get rid of this. And then we'll say local storage dot set item current task list, I think is what we called that. And then we're just going to say JSON stringify once again our current tasks. So now as we come into here and we start to exit out of these things, let's start with the top so you can see it removing it. It's just removing them by their index. Whatever one we clicked on is being removed. And it's getting rid of all of those values. And now when we refresh, they'll all be gone. We can come back in here and say something, task 2, task 3, and now refresh the page here, and they are all still there. If we click out of them, again, they will be removed, and if we refresh, they're still removed. Okay, so that completes our project there. We've got just this really basic to-do list that you can enter new tasks on, hit enter, hit this button if you'd rather, exit out of them, and it will work for you just like that. Now again, it's local storage, so it's only the device you're on. You can't like transfer this between devices or anything. You'd have to use some kind of server for that. But this is a nice little project, and I think just thinking through these kinds of steps is the biggest help. Now, if you like this channel and you want to help support what I'm doing here, it really does help if you just hit the like button, or if you subscribe. I try to come out with content a few times a week just as I'm learning things or trying to reinforce things that I've been learning, and that will be a big help to me as I continue making content. All right, well, thanks so much, and happy coding.